Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Well, Tony, on our last show, we talked about the offensive line and spent 30-something minutes saying kind of like shrug emoji because, we'll see. We'll all find out together. I'm excited to talk about the defensive line, which is a position I feel like we actually may have a few more answers for.
And so that means it's a much shorter show because here are the answers. All right, good night, everybody. And then there's no hemming and hawing about because it takes a long time to be like.
I didn't say we had all the answers. I said we had more answers. Which
true, we have one answer.
I feel like 3 answers might be more answers than we had the last show. So we have that to look forward to.
Because we asked at the end of the last show, like, what percentage of the two deep of that offensive line could you get correct? And you said 60% would be way too high. If you're just talking the two deep of the defensive line, which we can talk about later on, I feel like the percentage considerably higher. Just don't know exactly where everybody is necessarily going to be. But let's do this. What do we know about the Ohio State defensive line? I feel like the place you start with is defensive end. Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau. Only one returning starter. JT Tuimoloau is the returning starter. Jack Sawyer came off the bench and rotated with Zach Harrison. Obviously, those are the two guys that everybody's going to know about. Most already do. Jack Sawyer tied for the team lead in sacks, 4.5 last year with Mike Hall, I believe. And when you tell people that all of these people are upset with Jack Sawyer's lack of production, it's like, well, actually, he led the team in sacks. And they're like, well, that doesn't sound right. Now, 4.5 sacks leading the team may not sound right as well. And I believe that is correct. But now those two guys, I feel like we know about them. They are above all else, the anchor, Tom, that we can put, like, we know what's going on with this defensive line, at least this part.
Yeah, those are the two kind of free spaces here. And I feel like the number 3 defensive end is kind of also a pretty certain thing. If you tell me JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer, Caden Curry are the top 3 defensive ends, I would put about 85 or 90% confidence on that those are going to be your top 3 guys this year. And there are other guys who are going to be in that mix for that 4th spot. There's certainly other talented players. And, maybe Kenyatta Jackson and Amari Abor both take huge leaps this year and somehow surpass Caden Curry. And yeah, maybe that's a possibility. But I feel like with a pretty high degree of confidence, I would put Caden Curry there. And then there's also, this is one of the reasons this is unlike the offensive line is because the way Larry Johnson rotates, you've seen a lot of these guys. Even the guys who weren't starters, like Sawyer, as you mentioned, played a lot of snaps. Ty Hamilton on the interior played a lot of snaps last year. Mike Hall probably didn't play as many snaps as most people would have liked, but when he did, he was extremely impactful, and you're going to see him somewhere this year. He's probably a starter in there, somewhere, whether it's him or Ty Hamilton. And Tyleik Williams, you can kind of, find and replace Mike Hall there and put Tyleik Williams' name in there, and you've got people who probably feel largely the same about Tyleik Williams. And you talked to Larry Johnson and asked him about sliding one of those guys over so you could potentially have 2 guys starting, Williams and Mike Hall playing next to each other. And it was kind of like, yeah, I don't know, maybe.
Yeah. Every year talking to Larry Johnson about moving guys around. And what about this guy? And it's always like, well, this is just a process. It's always a process. Got to find out what they can do. And that starts in spring. Caden Curry, you mentioned, and we will talk about him, but he played defense in 8 games last year and played in every game. The other 5 were special teams, but didn't play against Michigan or Georgia on defense. I'm with you, though. He is certainly the number 3 guy. In terms of what to expect this spring from Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau, I feel like I don't know how much you need to see from them or how many reps. I still think they need to get as comfortable in Jim Knowles' system as possible. So you can't necessarily take it easy on them. But also, you have to find guys behind them so that you can continue this rotation. And not that you need to make it as deep as it's been or as equal as it's been, because I think you can give Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau more reps than the starters had last year and be okay with that. But like, you got to figure out what you're going to get out of them this spring, and then, apply the reps to the other guys. But I think those guys are what we know. Also, it's what Larry Johnson told me. Mike Hall will be starting somewhere, and that's what the ultimate response was in terms of, will he be at nose tackle again, or will he be at 3-tech? He's going to be somewhere, and good, he should be. And if you want, I got to feel for Vic Cutler at this point, where how often are you going to be going against Mike Hall if it's good versus good, ones versus ones instead of ones versus two? Although he's not probably going to get it's not going to be easy ones versus two either. But you come from Louisiana Monroe, you're starting in the center now for Ohio State, and you're dealing with Mike Hall. And I remember, was it last spring, watching Luke Whippler get pushed around by Mike Hall, and it was like, okay, this guy is legitimate. This is something to pay attention to. And he really caught our eye in camp, and he was giving Luke Whippler some difficulty. So, good luck to Vic Cutler, Carson Hinsman, Toby Wilson, Josh Padilla, because Mike Hall is coming.
Yeah, Mike Hall is coming, and he barely played for long stretches last season because of an injury, and he played 7 snaps and had 3 sacks, I think, against Michigan State. It was
2.5 technically.
2.5. Oh, sorry. Yes. Well, welcome to rounding. And me trying to remember football stats off the top of my head 5 months after the game.
Also, one of those, an 8th play was negated for illegal hands to the face or penalty by Zach Harrison. That would have been a 3.5 sack.
Yes. So yeah. Basically 50% of the snaps he had against Michigan State last year, he got to the quarterback and took the quarterback down in the backfield. That's pretty good. If these trends continue, it is those are not numbers that are going to be sustainable over the long term. But if you're just getting to the quarterback 4 times, even if it's just 4 pressures in the course of a game in 30 snaps, that's still pretty darn good and pretty productive. So I don't think there's any question to your, like you said, Larry Johnson is also smart enough to know that when you have a guy like that and he's healthy, you should play him whenever and wherever you can. What's going to be interesting of the guys we've talked about so far is, feels like there's a little bit of, what is Jack Sawyer's role going to be? Is he just going to be the hand in the dirt guy? Because he played Jack last season, where he, was kind of wandering around and playing, standing up. It feels like that's going to change a little bit this year, potentially, where he's going to go down to maybe more of a traditional, 3-point stance, defensive end, rush end kind of guy. And that then brings about a change to the Jack position and who's going to be sliding into that Jack position. And, that's one of the spots where we've heard a bunch of names, but it feels like there's kind of questions with all of those guys because some of them have been hurt and some of them haven't played a ton yet. And so there's, that's another thing that's sort of a variable here as we're talking about this defensive line. How is that Jack position going to get manned this year? Because I feel like it might be different than it was in 2022.
There really seems to be a bit of a disconnect with the Jack position between Larry Johnson and Jim Knowles. Jim Knowles wants that spot out there. Doesn't have to be out there all the time. In the Jack, with Jack Sawyer standing up, walking around as a quasi linebacker defensive end. But just the fact that Larry Johnson said on signing day, I'd like to have Jack Sawyer just be the defensive end. Find a home at defensive end and get good at it. When coaches are speaking out like that, that's a little bit surprising, where it's that's normally something that they would just keep behind the scenes in terms of, we'll do whatever, blah, 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 coach speak, blah, blah, blah. And instead he's like, I'd like to see him just focus on being a defensive end. Now, that could happen if Mitchell Melton can become the guy at Jack. Unfortunately, he's not going to be ready this spring to do that, to see if that's going to come forward. It would be the easiest of all solutions, the best of all solutions, because Jim Knowles likes Mitchell Melton. Larry Johnson would like to keep Jack Sawyer at defensive end. I wonder how much of that position, of the Jack position, we see this spring. If Jack Sawyer still needs some work at that, I think they do. I think he does, but who else would do it? Because when I asked Jim Knowles, could it come from the linebacker, and he said probably not. Because I saw Mark Givler talking about it on his chat on Tuesday. Like, it's so easy for us here to be like, man, CJ Hicks, Sonny Styles, just do some different stuff with that. Use some of these crazy athletes that you have. And Jim Knowles feels like it's like, no, it's Mitchell Melton and it's Jack Sawyer. And it's like, but yes, somebody other, you get all these toys to play with. No.
It's never quite as easy to just shift people around as you probably want to think. But, to your point, there does seem to be a disconnect between Jim Knowles and Larry Johnson in terms of what they want, what roles they want for certain guys. Mitchell Melton, I think, is the person I would say is the most likely to be the starting Jack when things are all said and done this fall, because he was last spring, he was coming on very, very strong, and then unfortunately had a non-contact tore his knee injury during the spring game. I think if he was healthy, I think you were going to see him a bunch during the fall. Assuming he comes back 100% and ready to go after the spring, I think you're probably likely to see him in that role this fall as well. But Jack Sawyer, what is Jack Sawyer? I will say with 100% confidence, if Jack Sawyer is healthy, Jack Sawyer is going to be playing a significant number of starters minutes and snaps this fall. What's your degree of confidence that Jack Sawyer is playing 98% of those with his hand in the dirt? Because I don't know that it's as high there. I think Jim Knowles as the defensive coordinator may win out there if that's what he really wants, but Larry Johnson's the one in charge of dividing those minutes up and deciding who's playing where. So I don't know. That's going to be really interesting to watch because it does feel like there's a little bit of a philosophical divide there between those two guys.
Yeah, and I think I've talked about it before where Larry Johnson is this ultimate technician where hand placement is key. Your hand, it needs to be at this angle, and your foot needs to be tilted up this much, and you need to be so perfect. And then Jim Knowles last year talking about Jack Sawyer saying, I just wish he would be more reckless. They're polar opposites almost in terms of what they're asking for, but you're paying Jim Knowles $1.9 million to run a defense. People need to listen to him. Let him show you, and if there's people who are fighting against him, you're not helping anything. And it's if you're not going to give him the fair shake and then pay him $1.9 million, you're also not doing yourself any good in terms of Ryan Day. Like, if you're not laying down a law that the defensive coordinator gets what he wants, although I guess he probably, the fact that the Jack was out there and it was Jack Sawyer, he's getting that. But until this marriage that they have is more seamless, and again, Mitchell Melton, tons of pressure on you, son, to get out there and fix this marriage. And I can tell you, as the last child of a broken marriage, it's not easy to fix a marriage, especially as a child. So, but that's neither here nor there. So in terms of what we think we know, I'm with you, though. I have Caden Curry as the number 3 defensive end here. To me, we know that. That's who it could not possibly be anybody else, almost. And you said, yes, it could be Kenyatta Jackson. It could be Omari Abor. Maybe Mitchell Melton, sort of, if you want to throw that in there. But I just don't see that happening. He is the number 3. He is going to be rotating in with those two, with Jack Sawyer and with JT Tuimoloau, and not only just rotating in, but I think we all expect him to produce very, 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 very well. Not 10 sacks or anything like that, but when he's in there, he makes stuff happen.
Yeah, he's a guy who you notice when he's out there, and that's true in garbage time. That's true. I mean, it might have been the Arkansas State game. I'm now trying to remember in my head what time of day and where the sun was, because I remember how it looked through the camera lens. I think it was either the Arkansas State game or the It was a day game, so I'm going to say Arkansas State. He came in and was in for, one drive or two drives towards the end of the game, and you immediately you saw this, flash going across and guys making diving tackles and all that kind of stuff, and that was Caden Curry. And he's someone who, going back to high school, you saw him play in high school. And it was just like, yeah, this is a guy you find on the field. Sometimes you see a player during high school and it's like, you would have expected to notice the high level Division I prospect a little more. He was someone who has just always jumped out, and he's always been someone who coaches just love his work ethic, love his attitude, love his motor, all that kind of stuff. He's going to be one of those dudes. He feels like someone who, if Jack Sawyer led the team in sacks with 4.5 this year, then Caden Curry feels like someone who, as the third defensive end off the, first defensive end off the bench, third defensive end overall, he could lead the team with, 6.5 sacks and he leads the team. That wouldn't be completely shocking, because there's going to be a little bit of a different dynamic there this year, because last year you had Zach Harrison, who was the veteran. He was, the starter, so that was one thing that kept Jack Sawyer off the starting lineup, and Caden Curry as well. And then you also had Javonte Jean-Baptiste, Tyler Friday, guys who were veterans, guys who were, fourth, fifth year guys who were in that room, who, got minutes, played maybe more than their production might have suggested they should have been playing at times. And some of that's going to be, you're going to defer to your veterans a little bit because you sort of know what you got out of them. You don't have that anymore. You don't have, fourth and fifth year defensive ends in that room anymore. Tyler Friday's gone. Javonte Jean-Baptiste transferred to Notre Dame. So there's going to be more reps for those young guys, for the Caden Currys, for, potentially the Mitchell Meltons, for the, Mitchell Melton might actually be a fourth year guy, but I kind of don't count him as a veteran because he's, has been on the bench and then hurt. So you haven't really seen him as much, but for Kenyatta Jackson, for Amari Abor, for all of those guys, there's maybe more of a path to the playing field than there might have been a year ago.
And I'm not sure how many of these tackles for Caden Curry came on special teams last year. Probably some. He had 14 tackles last year. Jack Sawyer, as a true freshman, had 13. JT Tuimoloau, as a true freshman, had 17. So he finds the ball in the limited opportunities that he has. The other thing that I think we know is that Larry Johnson loves Ty Hamilton. And Ty Hamilton eventually took over as the starting nose tackle, in part because Mike Hall was injured, but also, I can't remember if it was Larry Johnson or I think it was Larry Johnson told me that Ty Hamilton won the job. Well, yeah, maybe if he's competing against a banged up Mike Hall, but clearly he kept the job, and they like him. They like his strength. They like his ability to just be that nose tackle. He's not the biggest guy, and he's gotten bigger every year that he's been at Ohio State. But as we know with those Hamilton brothers, they get better as they get older. And now this is year 4 for him, I believe. If he stays at nose tackle, which I think he will, then whatever happens with Mike Hall, I think you're just going to see plenty of Ty Hamilton and whoever else is that other nose tackle rotating in and out with him. So that's the other thing I think we know is Larry loves Ty Hamilton, and we're going to see him at nose tackle again this spring.
Yeah, this is the 4th year for Ty Hamilton, and this is another one that feels completely impossible because he was just a recruit a couple of years ago, and now all of a sudden he's in his 4th year, and I don't understand anything. It is. He's someone who the starter delineation on the interior of the defensive line is maybe a little less meaningful because those just the bigger guys, you're going to rotate the bigger guys a little more maybe than you are some of your ends. So, and Larry Johnson's known for rotating a lot at all of the positions on the line. So, you can be the starter or you can be the backup at nose, and you're probably going to end up in the 30 to 40 snap range almost either way if they feel like there's not that big of a drop off. And it feels like if it's Ty Hamilton, Mike Hall, there's probably not a tremendous drop off there. So yeah, it's, who starts there. I kind of almost don't care because it feels like you're going to have, with the way they rotate guys there, you're going to have both of those guys on the field a lot either way.
Yeah, and Ty Hamilton played the second most snaps among defensive tackles last year behind Teron Vincent. and he's going to play a bunch again this year. So what are we going to learn about this defensive line this spring? Do we think we'll learn where Mike Hall will end up? Will it be decided this spring? Okay, we're going to try him at the 3 tech so that you can have the 2 guys you feel best about. Or will there be a situation, which takes me to the next point, we can combine these, is Tyleik Williams ready to be a dominating defensive tackle? And if so, I pairing him and Mike Hall next to each other, side by side, for 40 snaps a game, 35 snaps a game, that just seems incredibly disruptive in this ideal world where you're getting the most out of each guy. When each guy's playing at their best, we know they're difficult to stop. Last year was very much a letdown for Tyleik Williams, and now this year he's very much could be in a contract year if he wants it to be. He doesn't have to be. But those two, if they can put it together, that is the kind of duo that Ohio State fans should get excited about. So we'll see this spring. If they end up closing the spring out next to each other, I think that's very significant.
Yeah, I think that's maybe the highest ceiling of the potential combinations on the interior of that defensive line, because you've seen Hall, and I'm going to give you 2 different stats here for these 2 guys, and both of them are going to seem like that's not right. The first one is the one that we talked about earlier: 8 snaps against Michigan State, 3.5 sacks if you include the one that got negated by penalty. That seems like that should be impossible to do, and yes, he did it last year. The other one for Tyleik Williams is one of the fastest players on the team in the first 10 yards. That is how explosive he is coming out of the blocks. And as a interior defensive lineman, you don't need to run a lot of 40-yard dashes. You're not running 40 yards in a straight line very often. It is that quick explosiveness, that burst out of your stance at the snap of the ball. That's what matters. That is a combination between those 2 guys. We have seen a wide variety of outcomes with them. Hall really not playing a whole heck of a lot last year because of injury. Tyleik Williams just sort of inconsistent, and the explosiveness is there. I think it's more has been some kind of conditioning / effort / attitude / whatever you want to chalk it up to. Maybe more soft factor kind of stuff rather than just pure on field ability that's kept him out of from getting more reps. He will tweet free 91, and I think there are a lot of people who would like to see 91 freed a little bit more, but there's stuff that has to happen before that happens, and this is a big off season for him. This is a big off season for Mike Hall. If Mike Hall stays healthy, this could be a contract year for Mike Hall. This could be a contract year for Tyleik Williams. I mean, you could potentially lose all 4 of those guys from that 2020 defensive line class: JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer, Tyleik Williams, Mike Hall, and while that would not do great things for the 2024 Ohio State offensive line, if all 4 of those guys are turning pro after this year, and that is a possibility, that probably means they had a pretty darn good 2023 up front.
Yeah, and in one vein there, you just destroyed Ohio State fans and gave them some terror, but then you brought it home, and if they are all 4 leaving, then you're probably in the playoffs again, and you probably have a defense that you're proud of. So, we'll see. We'll see what happens, Tom, how fans feel about it after the fact. But if you have 4 defensive linemen that are good enough to leave early, and not just, I'm going to go be a 6th rounder, or I'm going to be an undrafted free agent, but who are leaving early to be drafted, that would be significant. Do we expect any of these second-year guys to step forward? Kenyatta Jackson, Amari Abor, Hero Kanu, obviously Caden Kerr we know, but of those 3, this is going to be a significant opportunity because they need to show something. And it's not, they better do it now or else they're done. It's like, no, you just, at some point, you need to start making plays because there are only 3 defensive ends, not counting Mitchell Melton. So there are jobs available. We've already talked in the past about how thin the defensive tackles are. So there are reps and positions to be won here. And so those 3, including Caden Curry, if you want to throw all 4 of them in there, those second-year guys need to be a big part of this team, and they need to show that they can handle it this spring.
Well, yeah, you on the rundown, you have any second year guys going to step forward? And the answer is they better, because there are holes that need to be filled there. And, the fourth defensive end is going to play. The fourth defensive end is going to play minimally. I mean, I'm not looking at any kind of snap charts right now, but, that fourth defensive end is going to play 10 to 15 snaps a game, more than likely, based on how Larry Johnson has rotated there in the past. That fourth interior defensive lineman, he's going to play 20 snaps a game, 15, 20 snaps a game. You have to have someone there, and asking a true freshman to do it, especially in the interior of the defensive line, that's going to be a tough ask. So you really need Hero Kanu to kind of take that next step and be ready to at least contribute on the interior of the defensive line. It doesn't matter whether it's Kenyatta Jackson or Amari Abor or both. You need someone to step up and be that fourth defensive end, or for it to be Mitchell Melton. But, there is going to be a position there available for the taking. They just need someone to take it.
Yeah, and if they don't, that would be a concern. I don't know that you necessarily go to the portal. You just hope you continue to work and build and get them to do it in fall camp. But if they only play 3 defensive ends, I don't think that's the end of the world, because they can do some other things around it. And again, Mitchell Melton being as a jack in there will take some of those snaps away. If they have to shorten the rotation, I think they'll be okay. In terms of will any freshman get into the two deep? There's only one freshman in the spring, and that's Will Smith, a defensive tackle. I'm not expecting that to happen, but again, it's not the deepest room. So if it does, I wouldn't totally be shocked. I just, if it's too deep is a tall ask, because you're having to jump ahead of either like Hero Kanu or even Jaden McKenzie or Tyleik Williams, and I just don't see that for Will Smith at this point.
Yeah, that feels like that's probably going to be a very difficult ask, because there's a lot that you have to do physically to be ready to play in the interior of a Big Ten defensive line. That's not something that, a high school weight training program is great, but that does not necessarily prepare you to just be able to walk on and just day one start in the interior of the defensive line. That's just not a spot where you see that happen very often. So, and Jaden McKenzie, if Jaden McKenzie is your fourth or fifth defensive tackle or inside, he's been, how many years this is Jaden McKenzie's fifth year, I think. It's going to be like Jerron Cage last year, where it's just, this guy's been here long enough. He's been in the weight program long enough. He's been in the meeting rooms long enough. He knows all the stuff. He's prepared. That's going to be a hard thing for a true freshman to overcome. So that's something that's, I am not expecting to see any of the true freshmen just be out there and be, immediate contributors this year. There are some guys in that defensive line room, true freshmen, that have some very bright futures. It's a little bit like offensive line. It just kind of takes a while.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at Jaden McKenzie. I think he's fourth year, but again, he has played so little that at this point, to expect him to burst onto the scene, that's what the spring is for. If we can do it then, we start talking about him, then great. In terms of do we have it too deep, I think we could. The Jack thing throws a wrench into it, because it goes from like 8 guys to 10 guys, and then it gets a little bit wonky. I think we know the top 3 defensive ends, as we've said. The top 3 defensive tackles in terms of Mike Hall, Ty Hamilton, Tyleik Williams. You don't necessarily know where everybody's going to play. It's who is the fourth defensive tackle? Probably, if Hero Kanu and Jaden McKenzie are even, you probably know which one you're going to go with. And same thing as that fourth defensive end. Is it Kenyatta Jackson, who is more of a pass rusher? Mari Abor is kind of more of a stock guy. Will somebody else emerge? I think we know the top 6, and then it's just the spring will determine who those other guys are. Tom, anything else before we get out of here?
No, I think we've covered it. It should be a really interesting spring at the defensive line, just to see how this all shakes out, because this is a little like the offensive line. They've got more returning pieces. Who you're pretty confident in. 4 of these 5 guys are going to be the starters, which is definitely not how you feel about the offensive line. But there are enough moving parts there, and the ceiling. If you do have that 2020 defensive line recruiting class, and that's your starting four, the ceiling there is crazy, crazy high. And you go back to I always go back to those Clemson teams, those kind of mid 2010s Clemson teams, where it was like a defensive line driven team almost, where they had good quarterback play, but these were not the most talented top to bottom teams in the country. But the defensive line was so dominant that kind of drove the whole team. If you have that kind of defensive line at Ohio State, and that's a possibility this year with some of the guys who were in that third season and some of the other guys we've talked about on the show, that's a real intriguing defense, because an Ohio State defense that is defensive line driven, that can overcome a multitude of sins in the back seven. So we'll see how that goes. But I think this is, these games are always won and lost in the trenches. The offensive line is kind of a big question mark right now, but man, the defensive line, there's some questions there, but man, the ceiling there is real, real, real high if everything kind of breaks right for them.
Exactly. And as we know, pass defense starts up front. So if you want good coverage, get a good pass rush, and those two will go well together. So that will do it for us. I want to thank you all for joining us. As always, please check us out at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Become a premium member. Say hello to us there on the message board. Also find us at YouTube.com/BuckeyeHuddle as well. Like the videos, subscribe if you haven't already. I know you have. Go ahead and, as I said, hit the bell to be notified when we drop videos, when we go live, all sorts of things like that. So thank you all for tuning in, and we'll talk to you guys later.